Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Hey, world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Hey, world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Howdy, folks. Your host, Double J, back here, coming at you live from my studio / RV dining room. Late, as always, right? Located directly inside America. Welcome back, folks of the interwebs. Once again, your host of Operation GCD, JJ Vance here, and perhaps more notably, not the vice president. Anyhow, welcome back, folks to the interwebs. Thanks again for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. We'll be your pilot and navigator here tonight for this shenanigan-infused journey into the mind of this particular garbage can dude. And I'm not going to lie to you, folks of the interwebs, got a real barn burner here on deck for y'all tonight. The Anatomy of the Satanic Panic, Volume 12. So, folks joining in here tonight for the first time, we're building on the previous volumes here of the legendary tales of everyone's favorite U.S. Army psychological operations officer, allegedly Green Beret Special Forces, although I argue that dilly bastard, Michael Aquino, passed no such physical fitness exams. You know, to be Special Forces, that is. Anyhow, the tales of old Muppet Mikey Aquino, the Satanic Panic, a real-world, actual, well-manufactured, well-financed psychological operation in America, weaponizing Christianity, just like Aquino did in the Phoenix program over there in Viet fucking Nam. And there wasn't actual psychological operations, but that was to hide the real-world satanic murders and satanic ritual abuse that was occurring. So, and it's not just we've been telling these tales, you know, unpacking these psychological operations, if you will. So we've done that thus far. We're going to be building upon that further tonight, you know, including characters like everyone's favorite, disinformation agent, Laser Tag Ted Gunderson, you know, pal with old Muppet Mikey there.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
They got Ted twice, folks. Then laser beams are dangerous. So we're going to be going over tonight, building upon the previous, discussions here, talking about those actual real-world satanic murders. And this is the free Patreon preview here, folks. So thanks again for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD on these matters. Check out patreon.com/Operation GCD for the remainder of tonight's program. But we'll be doing an introduction to these matters, building upon our previous shows, and looking at that epicenter of activity. So the Phoenix program come home, as McGowan cites in his program to kill, the satanic serial killer movement. We can see those patterns in that theory actually, providing validity to it, because when we start mapping these things out, geographically speaking, temporally speaking, time-wise, paints a very accurate picture of McGowan's theory. Now, I'm not saying that all of these ritualistic murders began on April 30th of 1966 in the founding of the Church of Satan. However, what I am, nor those satanic ritual abuse, that is the moment in which this became more of an organized psychological operation to terrorize America. In doing so, labeling it satanic, because again, that's the weaponized culture, weaponized religion, right? Weaponized folklore. That's how Aquino made his bones, as we've heard him talk about himself. So in many respects, I like to take these folks' word for themselves. You don't have to listen to me, folks. So we'll be unpacking some of the results of these matters. So as I keep focusing on here, the results of what caused these different phases in the propaganda. The phase one, from the first time we hear Satanic Panic in 1975, revolving around that evangelical movement with Mike Warnke and John Todd, the fake former satanic priests. Todd was a kid diddler and a Nazi, apparently. Anyhow, we see the purposes there when we start reviewing the actual crimes and murders. So we're going to take a look at some of those, a broad analysis, if you will, starting to unpack these things on a deeper level of the actual incidents that occurred previous to 1966, be it murders and ritual abuse. And then we see the matters between 66 and 1975, the onset of the Church of Satan, in that first phase one of the Satanic Panic. Because there's murders going on, lots of them. Ritual abuse going on, lots of it, from 66 to 75. But we see the purpose, the impetus thereof, the result. And that's the one thing I keep trying to stress here, folks, is the result of not only the psychological operations, the victimization and outlying effects thereof of all these murders and ritual abuse of children. So we'll be unpacking those matters, keeping it sus 24/7 here. Thank you, Lucy Morningstar. And it is interesting when we start looking at these matters in that respect, and understanding that there was an impetus behind these matters, and the result of which was these different phases of the propaganda. So that first phase being in 75, but what we can also extrapolate from looking at that is we can see the geographical patterns, these cells, if you will, just like a Keno set up in Viet fucking Nam in the Phoenix program. We can see cells of the satanic murder situations. We can see different cells, geographically speaking and time-wise, temporally speaking, of the satanic ritual abuse. And, that's important to focus on, because we can see in these different geographical regions through the different phases of these different propaganda phases, be it 75 with the evangelical movement, 1980 with Michelle Remembers, which goes into the McMartin business. But the next phase is not till 92 with the Lanning report, and then the early to mid aughts with the early onset of the QAnon movement and those propagandists therein. The folks that walked in the path of Laser Tag Ted, that is. So it's important to focus on the fact that we can see that when we start mapping these things out geographically and time-wise, we can see that it's in these same areas, and there's crossovers in those regions as well. So we're going to be unpacking some of the results in that respect and understanding those matters tonight. Focusing, though, on the 1966 to 75 movement predominantly, the actual murders and ritual abuse that were going on there, to understand why they would have to incorporate a new phase in the propaganda. Evolve and understand where their shortfalls are. So that's important to know and understand. And my favorite folk of the interweb, our channel. What do we got here? AI bot, CIA AI bot, and Bill Colby ball washer. What do we got here? McGowan theory of Phoenix come home is fantasy. Well, you, sir, have not been paying attention to anything I've been documenting herein in the previous 11 editions of tonight's program. Nor have you, you tune in tonight, you'll see that direct reflection of that Phoenix program come home in that 66 to 75 flap. So I don't know if you were trying to make my point for me, but I do appreciate it. And so when we're looking at these things, again, it is important to note. So on a couple other administrative points here, if you folks are going to check out the Patreon side of this, I highly recommend I repeat, do not. I am not the vice president, but I recommend you do not use Apple. They charge like a 30 or 40% surcharge. Been told there's a number of Android issues signing up for the Operation GCD Patreon. And so it seems to be the workaround is use a computer, not the mobile edition. Sign up on the Patreon website from a computer. And then you can download the Android app or the Apple app and then access the Patreon from there. So a couple recommendations there, lessons learned, if you will, just like the lessons learned by these Nazi Satanists in this Operation Gladio Phoenix program, satanic serial killers causing chaos and discord across America, for various purposes, from tyrannical laws to control of the population to hits, like organized hits, Satanic Murder Inc., if you will. So important things to understand and consider going forward here in the series there, notably our channel, if you care to actually, retain some facts that are going on here and not just your fantasies. But because again, I don't use my words, I'm using their words. And we've seen a Keno talking about Thomas Eugene Creech, a satanic serial killer from the onset of the Church of Satan, a member, 1966, and a man who went on a satanic serial killer murder spree in Idaho and sits there today awaiting death penalty despite them trying to kill him numerous times. However, he has a lot of direct connections to the activities and patterns of Edward Wayne Edwards. He has direct connections to Ted Bundy. So when we start mapping these things out and understanding these factors, it's paints a different picture, paints a very accurate picture from that theory that McGowan put forward 20 years ago. 20 plus years ago. So anyhow, the same guy that Aquino had a real problem with, he had to write McGowan and provide him the Nazi Satanic Panic telemarketing script. Oh, you're doing Satanic Panic. Oh, you believe in Michelle Remembers. Oh, McMartin, you believe in tunnels. You're a moron. Oh, Lanning report. You didn't realize the FBI looked into this. It's the same nonsense as we've seen from every telemarketing script proponent here of that same script of Aquino's on podcasts and documentaries, on blog posts, etc., etc. So on that note, we got a couple things coming up here before we go any further on Operation GCD. Tomorrow, we got Operation GCD Fridays, 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Times. I got Badgerlands Legends Jeff, man who's done a deep research and study into the ancient history of America, notably those mounds, and specifically mounds into the state of Wisconsin. Wisconsin has the highest concentration of effigy mounds in America, disregard the world. And those are the mounds that are not necessarily, those aren't the burial mounds. They are seemingly ceremonial, though, and ritualistic in purpose, but they are shaped in the shape of animals, like the giant serpent mound, as they call it, in Adams County, Ohio. It's the largest effigy mound in the world. Or the Effigy Mound National Park in Iowa, that Society of the Cincinnati man, Jefferson Davis, that guy who was the other first president here in America there for the Confederate States of America. He was guarding those mounds in Iowa during the War of 1812, Captain Jefferson Davis at the time. So these mounds are interesting, but yeah, Wisconsin specifically, very interesting, because another thing that comes at least to my brain hole when I'm looking at those mounds in Wisconsin is the large population of quote unquote satanic or witches covens in the state of Wisconsin. So it's strange to find this high volume of ritualistic effigy mounds from the ancient American past and the current onset of behavior in our current times with the ritualistic nature in cults in that region. And again, we see the satanic murders in that region. We see the satanic ritual abuse. We see the connectivity during even that time period from 66 to 75 where these events are occurring in the Milwaukee and Chicago area. We see the connectivity between folks like Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, and that connects down to the Houston pedophile and ritualistic abuse and murder network of John Norman and Phil Paskey. So, and that happens again in the 66 to 75 flap and carries over. So we continue to see that not only the geographical, activity, but we see direct examples of direct connections in that geographical activity carrying over between these different phases, which emphasizes the need, again, the motivations, the result of the evolution of the propaganda. So that's important to note, but we'll be doing more mound stuff, not Satan stuff tomorrow night. Although I don't know Jeff's outlook on any of these matters, so we may discuss some of that relative to the cult activity of these mounds there in the state. And then, of course, Sundays, somewhere here. Speaking of mounds, the folks who joined me for the Operation GCD live Patreon combo, Sundays and Thursdays, you'll find here some more mound adventures. The anatomy, I don't know why I'm doing that, of a mound cover-up. This is specifically going to discuss, focus around this mound that was buried by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers against a court order injunction to stop doing that in 1968. But it's thanks to the Society of the Cincinnati and those men who surveyed and mapped this mound on 4 separate occasions between the years of, I believe, 1794 and 1820, that we know this quote unquote Hanukkah mound existed. Now, I was able to locate the place where this mound is at the bottom of that lake due to the map here and the instructions therein. Now, other parties, for example, I was in a dispute numerous years ago when I read an article in the local paper there in Cincinnati or Claremont County saying that some other folks had located this mound. So I reached out to those folks and said, hey, you fellas are way off base. Do you know that, right? Did y'all read the map? I kept asking if they read the map. They kept responding, well, we're the NSA and we're doing this. We got NSA guys. We got technologies. And I'm like, cool, dude. I don't know what the NSA is involved in this for, but did you read the map? because they're about 10 miles off the location of the destination of this mound from the map. And again, this is a huge mound covering many acres. They're way off base because they're 10 miles away from the nearest point of that acreage. So I don't know if that's intentional or why the NSA is involved in the first place, but nonetheless, this is an interesting site because I feel like it was intentionally, the evidence exhibits it was intentionally buried to bury the past of these mounds in the history of America. Because again, this was flooded via a dam project by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, like many, many other mounds were by that same group for about 40 years from the 1930s to the 1970s. And they did this one in violation of a court order. The local folks had filed an injunction, had gotten an injunction from the court, and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said, nah, fuck y'all. We're going to do it anyway. So that'll be Sundays, unpacking some of those ideas and the matters in which these things have been hidden and how they've been hidden. So highly recommend folks check that one out as well. Appreciate all the support here on Operation GCD Patreons, and folks do the combo. We'll be there on Sundays as well. And then Wednesday at 9:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Times, we got an occult and or esoteric review of the 1993 cinematic masterpiece Striking Distance, where Bruce Willis reprises his role as John McClane, this time undercover as a riverboat patrol officer in Pittsburgh. I'm obviously being facetious. He's not actually John McClane undercover, but he is playing that same John McClane character. This time he's a riverboat patrol officer, formerly the top cop in Pittsburgh as far as the number one dude on the force, disgraced under some matters, but he finds himself entrenched in a serial killer investigation of a bunch of women's bodies being dumped in the rivers of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So that'll be coming up on Wednesday with the Cosmic Peaches, not Bill Colby, host of Conspiracy Playtime, and his wife there, Cosmic Peach Julia. So always appreciate their insights and time here participating on the film reviews at Operation GCD. Folks can check that one out on Wednesdays. But tonight, of course, we got Muppet Mikey, the anatomy of the Satanic Panic. And like I was saying, we're going to be going over those matters from 66 to 75, taking a broad analysis of the actual satanic murders and ritual abuse that were occurring to have a better understanding of the impetus behind that 1975 phase one flap of the Satanic Panic. Because at some point in time, when folks start paying too much attention or things become, obvious, or folks are following their, they're paying attention to their senses. Muppet Mikey here, the Star Wars fan fiction author, would tell folks, in a Jedi mind trick style, Nazi Satanist style, pay no attention to your senses. These are not the Satanists you're looking for. So under that concept and understanding, we can see why they need to evolve their propagandas and their mode of operations they're in when we see the volume of fucking murder and ritual abuse occurring. And again, we can see the crossover in every elements of these things, geographically speaking, the personnel involved, and again, temporally speaking, because when we start breaking these things off in these blocks of time from 66 to 75, 75 to 80, 80 to 92, 92 to circa, we'll call it 2008, and then 2008 there forward. So we see the same things involved, the same personnel involved, the same patterns of behavior, and that same Nazi Satanist telemarketing script that Aquino recited on TV and podcasts and emails to Dave McGowan, so on and so forth, and has been repeated ad nauseum by other folks. And we're going to be looking at some of the results of that. So again, not everyone who perpetrates those ideas or the ideas of Ted Gunderson, the false narratives thereof, not everyone who perpetrates those things do so intentionally. Some of them are deceived. I mean, I don't fault those folks who fall for the magic show. It is a well-crafted magic show by folks who understand psychology, psychological operations, that is, and deception. They are magicians, as they say. So we're going to be unpacking those things in reviewing the statements of a podcast that was done a couple years ago, I believe about a year and a half, by folks that do a great analysis of the tales of Ted Gunderson. And we'll focus on the result, right? What is the result of not only just the victimizations, the psychological operations of, Muppet Mikey and gang with the telemarketing script, but we have the other side of that psychological operation as well, the Ted Gunderson side, right? He's there from moment one in 1980, really, and we see the narratives and tales that he toured the nation on for decades, describing, being accurately portrayed in a podcast. And these folks believe a lot of what he's saying. A lot of that shit's false, and we'll go over some of that as well, as we've already gone over some in the past. But we'll highlight in this podcast episode how some of that stuff is relevant, and how, again, the result of Ted's actions. Good old laser tag Ted, because there is a result to these matters from each side of this, satanic panic pyramid, if you will. And I think it is those results that is plaguing America in regards to these matters, be it the ongoing murders, the ongoing ritual abuse, or the ongoing nature of folks not understanding their senses. Because it ain't new, right? We've seen back in that Geraldo interview these matters of a lot of substantiated evidence of these claims, not claims by Ted there with his laser tags, but the Kansas City matters of the butcher of Kansas City, Bordello there, and he comes at the tail end of the BTK in the same city. So you have to wonder again when you start mapping these things out, geographically speaking, time wise, and right, we see these patterns. And again, BTK starts murking folks there in 71, 72 during that first initial period. So. And again, we see the connectivity through a lot of these folks. And again, we see the result across the board when nothing is addressed and no one's held accountable. These things continue. The propaganda continues, the murders continue, and the satanic ritual abuse continues. Not just, the Army military daycares, not just Army, but DOD. But we see that there's 3 active investigations right now into 3 different locations across 3 different Army, I believe it's Army, Coast Guard, and Navy, 3 different daycare centers by the Department of Defense's Inspector General. So in order for it to get to the Inspector General level, it's already surpassed numerous levels of investigations and complaints. So therefore, what the fuck is going on? If you can have 3 simultaneous DOD IG investigations going on, 3 different daycare centers. Now, they're not saying Satanism, because they've learned their lesson. They've evolved not to use that word in regards to these abuse activities. However, looking at some of the statements from the parents and victims therein of these newer instances on bases, they're no different than the Presidio. They're no different than McMartin. And again, we see these matters again repeating themselves. And again, that is part of the result. If no one's held accountable, what's stopping these forces from continuing? So, and obviously, all of these matters are wrapped up in these ideas of national security. Not your national security. Sure as fuck ain't my national security. I don't know whose national security it is, but courtesy of the National Security Act of 1947, here in America, we have lost free speech. Free speech cannot exist when 3 folks can stamp things national security. And we see those folks like Henry Kissinger, like his pal and sidekick Brent Scowcroft, and they're directly related to these same Nazi satanic cults. The process, Kissinger through Bob Evans, Kissinger's sidekick, Brent Scowcroft's assistant, J.J. Bryan, again, not me, I'm J.J. Vance here, and I'm also not the vice president. We see his assistant, J.J. Bryan, starting a neo-process cult. So we have decades across the national security, upper echelon of the national security state here in America, in the process. And we see that continue again with the Zizian's attorney, Dan Kaplowitz, the Zith Lord, who apparently helped the Zith Lord, Jack Lasota, fake his own death under felony charges of gun stuff before he went out and murdered murk folks nationwide with his little death cult. That Silicon Valley-based, AI-focused, rationalist, vegan, transpocalypse, homicidal death cult known as the Zizians. Well, the attorney that helped him fake his death there, Lasota, before the terror campaigns, he just happens to be a band member of Nazi Satanist Boyd Rice. That fellow we've heard scream about being a Nazi and a Satanist a couple times from that Geraldo show. And a major figure in the Church of Satan and the Neo-Process movement. And again, Kapliwitz's some of his other associations, when he ran for mayor of Los Angeles in 2024, got 300,000 votes for the Green Party. His backer was Jimmy Carter's national security advisor. So we see more and more, not Zbigniew Brzezinski's right-hand man, but because Brzezinski's dead now, but Brzezinski was Kissinger's right-hand man, and they really worked for Nelson Rockefeller. So, and again, he's high up in that national security state as well. But nonetheless, we see these matters of national security over all of these things. And again, that is, one of the repeating patterns. So, and again, it's from the early onset and on forward, right, to our current day. Catch up on a couple of these remarks. See, RR's causing some trouble. What's new, right? He's got an interesting take on a lot of things. Most specifically, this wild notion. But I do appreciate your motivations and dedications to being wrong there, RR, but keeps me motivated. So these are the matters we're going to be going on tonight, folks. And I hope you folks at the interwebs can join us over there, patreon.com/OperationGCD, as we unpack more of these matters of the anatomy of the Satanic Panic. And if you catch us broadcast in the future, come on down over there, join us in the conversations on these matters. Hanukkah chocolates. Well, there was a Hanukkah mound here that was built a few thousand years ago by folks who had a great understanding of mathematics and astronomy that could shoot an azimuth a longer distance to build these direct, these huge mound complexes, as we saw in that picture. Speaking to modern surveyors and their little fancy gadgets, they only do about, I think it's 40 acres. They can shoot a straight azimuth line. Well, these mound builders were building 50 acre straight lines and mounds in a straight fashion. We're shooting lasers 40 meters. When I say we, the surveyors they're shooting fucking lasers.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
They got Ted twice. Those aren't the kind of lasers I'm talking about with the surveyors, but we can't replicate that today with our modern technology. So these folks had a great understanding of things. And again, it's of, the occulted history of America. We're propagandized here in America on all sorts of topics, not just Satanic Panic. And a lot of these modern day Satanists, specifically the Typhonian offshoot of the OTO, the Ordo Templi Orientis, or whatever the fuck you want to call that, the OTO there of Crowley, they love some mound stuff. They do a lot of mound rituals. I don't think they're the only ones. So, in fact, the smiley face killers cult, as the media has dubbed it. That's a media name, by the way. They seem to be very much focused on doing ritual human sacrifices of young men, highly intelligent, highly educated young men, just as Crowley prescribed, on mound sites. So the ancient sites of human sacrifice in America seem to be part of this neo movement of the Satanists as well. So these matters of the mounds are interesting in that regard. And once again, the state of Wisconsin, a high volume of satanic occults and Wiccan covens, if you will, there, which we've gone over. The Wiccans, all the Wiccan leaders all say that they venerate Crowley as more of a Satanist than LaVey could ever be. We see that in Aquino's autobiography and the Church of Satan business. And we see that, the machinations therein. So we see the Order of the Nine Angles neo-Satanist Nazi cult is an offshoot of one of those Wiccan organizations. We see that evangelical leader in this 1975 to 1980 phase one propaganda, John Todd. We see that he was running a Wiccan coven and actually lost the franchise license due to kid diddling. So, kid diddling, he was never held accountable. He skirted charges on for over 14 years while touring America, telling everyone, about the Satanists. They're in your music. They're in the Dungeons and Dragons, teaming up with Fritz Springmeier, another Nazi domestic terrorist who bombed shit and went to prison for it, yet somehow still has credibility. Credibility somehow still today, like their pal Ted Gunderson. So Ted's a major throughput because he connects to all of these characters on his national tours. He was promoting them. And still continue to do so even after Springmeier, a.k.a. Victor Schoof, gets out of prison for, Nazi bombing shit. And we see folks like Tracy Twyman, who walks in the path of Ted Gunderson, doing the same stuff. She's even promoting Springmeier while he's in prison and when he's out of prison afterwards. So it's funny. But, when we look at the matters we're going to look at tonight with these reviewing this one podcast, given, who accurately describes the life and times of Ted Gunderson, Laser Tag Ted, as described in those national tours, in those conferences and speeches that he gave, from claiming that he's the one behind, Discovery L. McMartin tunnels to shit coating the Jeffrey McDonald case, etc. We've already covered some of those aspects and details. And in this podcast from 2023, we can see again folks who are not Nazi Satanists by any appearances and who, by all appearances, have fallen for the magic show. They accurately describe the tales as sold by Ted, and he's doing the finder stuff. Again, everything we've already covered of how he inserts himself into all these matters, and nothing's held accountable. And Ted's never held accountable for his wild claims that he does, and to discredit all of these matters, such as
there's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
I've never once seen twice. They got Ted twice, but I've never once seen any evidence substantiating such claims. That's what I'm saying. So we see him even in the McMartin tunnel case. We see on his tedgunderson.info website today. Who the fuck runs that, right? We see he's got the McMartin report on there where he inserted his own resume on the front cover of the report. So he goes, Ted's fucking resume for a couple pages, and then the report about the tunnels. So, I think that is a microcosm of Ted Gunderson right there. He had nothing to do with it. We know that from the mother of one of those victims of McMartin. So we'll see the result. We'll see the result from two different podcasts actually, but one focusing on the finders, and again, Ted's actions relative therein, and how these matters of Ted and the tunnels have actually been used to discredit the finders. And again, this is what I'm talking about as the result. And again, this is conspiracy culture by somebody who is, I think provides a great analysis of Ted as being a very dubious character, but at the same time, I don't necessarily agree with the conclusion they're reaching necessarily, but they do think in regards to the finders case that the reason why the McMartin tunnels, reports and the finders Freedom of Information Act request from the FBI is to further confuse the matter. And I guess to a certain extent, I do agree with that conclusion from this podcast host over there. It's, I don't know what this guy's name is. I forget now. I don't know. Let's just, we'll listen to him here in a second. I'll remember his name, but my point being there, folks, is we see how these things are being used, that the fruits of Ted's labor, as I've been asserting here, and my theory therein is he is being used to shitcoat and discredit these matters. We see that today from a guy who's reviewing an accurate analysis of Ted, accurate assessment. But, he's got a misguided nature of these tunnel reports because, again, Ted went around the nation telling everybody he's the one who did that. We know that's a lie. We know Ted, at the same time, Jackie McGauley, the McMartin mother whose home he had infiltrated, and victim's mother, she said that he had nothing to do with any of the tunnels. He kept trying to get involved in the investigation. She refused to permit such. She and 3 other parents hired that survey team. Ted, in response, would take a team of other parents from McMartin with shovels and the LA Times to the McMartin preschool site. And then he would cast a whole tale later of how he got that survey team on the site. So we see those things being explained by these podcast hosts, and we know that's false. But it is the result of laser tag Ted. And again, laser tag Ted, this guy, this other podcast host here, whose name I will remember in a second, he provides a great summary of what I'm talking about there, what I'm describing in regards to the summary of Ted's actions.
So I'm not going to get into that side of it. I'm not going to take a position one way or another on Gunderson because of the incredibly polarized nature of both his defenders and detractors. For all we know, he could have given himself arsenic poisoning.
And that's another one of those things that's rolling around the interwebs today regarding old laser tag Ted, that he got poisoned by arsenic. And a couple weeks back, we tracked down the epicenter of that notion. And that goes back to Ted's buddy, who interviewed, Lord of mercy. I'm not doing well with names right now, folks. Anthony Hilder was interviewing a Knight of Malta, a doctor who was not Ted's doctor, who had not seen any of Ted's medical file, but is the epicenter of that notion that Ted was poisoned by arsenic. A Knight of Malta. So it's not only the messages being sent, it's the parties who were sending these messages, disseminating them, because what's their purpose? Right? That's one thing to always consider that's one thing to consider here. What's my purpose? And I'll tell you right now what my purpose is, and that's to get a little GCD. And I thank you folks again here tonight for joining me to get a little GCD. Because again, we look at these matters of why they had to adapt and evolve the propaganda operations. And we look at the parties involved, again, notably Laser Tag Ted and the fruits of his labor. So, and again, I think it all is very interesting when we consider where we're at today here on these matters and how we got here. And, you know, we see other parties still perpetrating these ideas today. For example, when we know that Ted teamed up with old Alex Jones there on a lot of this stuff in the early aughts, you know, before he got that arsenic poisoning. And we see Alex Jones being a major figure in what the Nazi Satanist propagandists call Satanic Panic 2.0. That's the QAnon Pizzagate stuff, and they've updated their telemarketing script. Oh, you believe in Comet Pizza had a basement? Despite us seeing that the owner of Comet Pizza, James Alefontis, admits that he has a basement. That's the newest portion of the telemarketing script. Oh, you believe in you believe in tunnels? You're a moron. You believe that Comet Pizza has a basement? You're a moron. But we see Alex Jones, along with Michael Aquino's buddy, Paul Valet, the other author, his boss and co-author of Psyops of Mind War, being involved, you know, QAnon General Paul Valet, being involved in perpetrating these ideals. And we see folks like Tracy Twyman, who walks in the pathway of Laser Tag Ted, thanks him in all of his works, improperly cites and continues to perpetrate his false narratives, right? Improperly cites the facts, perpetrates his false narratives. We see her deeply involved in that same QAnon movement. So again, we see the same patterns of behavior, but what we're focusing on tonight, folks, is the geographical and time relations in that 66 to 75 movement and why they had to adapt and evolve and suddenly do this Psyops to Mind War evolutions starting in 75 into the 80 to 92, 92 to made it to circa 2008 and then forward. But we're focusing tonight on that first 75 through 66. But again, take a brief overview also there on the actual ritualistic murders and ritualistic abuse of children that existed previous to 66. Because again, there is something to be said there. When we look at these actions didn't begin in 66. They just got a new tag on it, a new marketing label, if you will, a new psychological operation. But again, it is the product of all of these things I think is important to focus on. Because again, I don't like to focus on all the negative. What is the result? What's the way forward? So once you identify the problem, is then you can start identifying a way forward. But that problem of first identifying that problem, knowing the known knowns, you know, the known knowns and the known unknowns, if you will. Because once again, when we're talking about psychopaths, I find it important, you know, to try to get your brain hole in the brain hole of a psychopath.
As we know, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't.
Is this a real statement? Or McGowan has no index, please reference pages, etc. Dude, is that your only complaint here? Dude, is that why it's a fantasy? That's ludicrous. Speaking of ludicrous, Donald Rumsfeld, that man was ludicrous. But he was a psychopath. He makes some good points there of the known knowns and known unknowns. We can identify a lot of known knowns. The known satanic ritual abuse and satanic murders from 66 to 75 tonight. We can known unknowns. We can see the connectivity of personnel, geography, and time-wise, temporally speaking, of all these activities as they progress. And the unknown unknowns is, well, that's shit we don't know yet, right? If we knew that they existed, they'd be known unknowns. But we're going to be going over those things here tonight, folks. Catching up on a couple comments here. Appreciate your all's commentary here. I'm just trying to catch up, way behind. But we do see the product of all these things. Again, the psychological operations of the Nazi Satanist telemarketing script, the victimization of the murders and the abuses, and the outlying effects thereof. But we also, once again, see the product of very reasonable, rational people, you know, folks that use their brain hole for something other than a paperweight as God intended, you know. Again, these folks are falling for a lot of the magic shows, the podcast we're going to, you know, review tonight and look at that result, right? The result of all these things. We see very reasonable folks can be deceived, right? Can be deceived. So, and I'm not talking about our channel. I don't think he's reasonable. I'm not even sure if he's a real. Might be an AI, CIA, AI chatbot, CIA Bill Colby ball washer, but see these results. And on that note, I just want to play a clip here before we go over to the Patreon side, folks, on that result of Ted's activities.
To a series of weird events just by initially investigating this case by one of his friends' requests, the old Jeffrey McDonald, who got falsely accused out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. One thing leads to another. Stumbles across this satanic community through the coerced confession, verifies that, finds his way to these preschools, ends up leading him to the finders, ends up leading to this raid, ends up leading to the conclusivity that there is, in fact, this international trafficking ring of children. And the claim that Gunderson puts on top of that is the finders is actually a CIA front. And his biggest claim to this, which he also shows in his lectures, is that there's an official U.S. custom report that establishes that the finders traffic children internationally in tandem with the CIA. Now, this document, he says, is pretty buried, and they're not really adamant on people seeing the light of it, but apparently international customs had caught enough of these things. Some agents were implicated, and one thing leads to another, and through the documentation, you can see that there's obviously direct CIA involvement, or at least they're acting as accomplices.
And again, I don't think those are Nazi Satanists. I think those are two reasonably minded folks trying to find answers in this crazy Muppet world. But they do a great analysis of accurately portraying the statements of Laser Tag Ted on his national tours and what he claimed that he was responsible for. But we know most, if not all, that was bullshit. And we'll unpack more of that further here tonight, folks. So on that note, once again, the other podcasts we're going to unpack a few clips from in regards to Laser Tag Ted and the results of his activities and actions on these matters. I still don't remember the name of this. I like this show. Lord of mercy, I can't think of the name of the show right now, but he does a good job at explaining, once again, the summary of Ted's activities.
Pages now depends on your feelings towards Ted Gunderson. And I don't know confidently enough one way or the other to say for sure. Ted Gunderson, for those unfamiliar, is an FBI agent who worked as the head of the Memphis, Dallas, and eventually Los Angeles FBI offices, and was interviewed, although eventually not chosen, for the position of FBI director. However, now he's better known for being an outspoken advocate for the awareness of basically every conspiracy theory ever, ranging from the more grounded, true ones, to the more dramatic ones that... So he has a position and reputation as a sort of patron saint of the QAnon movement, and due to the fact that he was one of the first major names to publicize the whole, Illuminati vampires are eating thousands of children every year to absorb their power and be evil. Which, that's something that we all know is only kind of true.
Yes, Flesh Simulator. Thank you. My fellow JJ to the rescue. And coming up here on other Fridays in 2 weeks, not tomorrow, but 2 weeks from tomorrow, we got some Mormon parapolitics discussions with Jacob J. Rise of Liberty, former ex-Mo like myself, or fellow ex-Mo like myself, and Heidi Love, another ex-Mormon. So appreciate the assistance there. I'm horrible with names sometimes. I was ready to call him Phil. But Flesh Simulator, yeah, I mean, he makes some great points, does some great analysis, I think, there. And again, he's right. Ted got himself in the early aughts. Once he got linked up with Alex Jones, they became a real force of perpetuating a lot of silliness. And when I say Alex Jones, I really mean Bill Hicks. Because again, we see even spooky characters like General Alfred Stubblebine, who is deeply involved in all those remote viewing business with them Scientologists at SRI and all that business, and directly related with John Alexander and the non-lethal weapon stuff and all those alien businesses, all the alien saps we see today from Hal Putoff and gang. He's part of that SRI stuff with Stubblebine, to John Alexander, non-lethal weapons there within the Army, who John Alexander and his wife were very close with Aquino, and his wife, their wives claim to be sisters. Can't find any evidence of such, but I do find lots of photographs together, and they have close relations. So we see the epicenter of all of this tomfoolery, if you ask me, folks. But nonetheless, Alex Jones obviously is or disregard Bill Hicks. Those folks on there, those spooky folks, Stubblebine, Jerome Corsi, etc. They, for some reason, amongst many other pieces of evidence, they have a real problem with calling Alex Jones Bill while being interviewed on his show. So I don't think, aside from the other circumstantial evidence, and there's lots supporting it, just that fact alone, you got these spooky characters. They all know Muppet Mikey, and again, we're told Muppet or Alex Jones is some bastion of freedom carrying on the torch of, again, folks like walking the path, folks like Laser Tag Ted. And again, that is how those podcast hosts described it. And they even sell Alex Jones in that same podcast, and I'll put the links to both of these, both the Flesh Simulator interview and this other podcast in the show notes. Folks can check out the whole shows. But we see even they're misdescribing, on the same natures of how the false narratives of Laser Tag Ted get perpetrated. We see the same aspects of Alex Jones / Bill Hicks. So we see him being credited with, he snuck into Bohemian Grove. He discovered Bohemian Grove, blah, blah, blah. That's bullshit. Back in circa 1982, when there was 3 channels in America, ABC, NBC, CBS, right? All 3 news programs on all 3 channels did coverage on Bohemian Grove. Alex Jones didn't discover shit. They were inside. They did footage. They interviewed folks. He didn't discover shit. He was probably invited in there with John Ronson. John Ronson, the author of the remote viewing folks I was just talking about with Arthur. Alfred Stubblebine. I'm fucking terrible with names. We'll just call him Phil Stubblebine. In the movie The Men Who Stare at Goats, that's that story that's being told there. Stubblebine's the idiot that tries to run through the wall. Unsuccessfully, obviously, because he's a fucking moron. Anyway, John Ronson's the one who wrote that book, The Men Who Stare at Goats. So that's who Alex Jones snuck into the Bohemian Grove with. And again, the Bohemian Grove started off as an artist, actors, and writers community. Still very much has a large component of which today, in regards to these matters, I would presume Jones or / Bill Hicks and Ronson got invited in themselves. His memberships have not recruited an attempt to be a member due to the nature of their, entertainer activities, if nothing else, the spooky nature of which we also see in that same regard in regards to Laser Tag Ted and friends, be it John Todd or Victory Schoof, aka Fritz Springmeyer, this Nazi domestic terrorist and kid diddlers, John Todd. We see they're pushing all this Illuminati stuff. Ted gets on that. Well, that really goes back. All this modern day Illuminati propaganda really goes back to before that. They built upon the work of Robert Anton Wilson. Would you believe Robert Anton Wilson lived just a couple miles outside the gates of the Bohemian Grove? Never heard him talk about it, though. That's fucking weird. So these are the matters I'm talking about. It's not always what they say, folks. It's the matters they won't say, right? And when you got a character who's pushing all those Illuminati stuff like Robert Anton Wilson, and you don't see him talk about Bohemian Grove and he lives out just outside the gate, well, you got to put 2 and 2 together. You got to trust your senses. You got to go in opposition to what Muppet Mikey's saying when he says, his Nazi Satanist Jedi mind trick. These are not the Satanists you're looking for, right? He's trying to say, do not trust your senses. There are no Satanists murdering folks or ritually abusing children. Again, we've documented otherwise, despite to the claims of old RR channel there, though. I do appreciate your time and dedication, RR. Keep me motivated. So, yeah, there you go. Thank you, Wes H. Using your brain hole. Pretty sure Jones was invited. I swear I saw a video of him admitting it. I have no doubt. He's deleted. Speaking of things that he deletes, in regards to whatever his current fucking nonsense is, or whatever GoFundMe campaign he's running, because we're getting shut down right today. He's run that one a couple times in the last year. Anyway, he back in 2017, him and old Joe Rogan, his pal Joe Rogan, they have the same manager, Bill Hicks's childhood best friend, Kevin Booth. Kevin Booth's been on the show with Alex numerous times over the years. He's called Alex Bill on the air. He said Alex is funnier than Bill, and they joke about him being Bill Hicks all the time while on the air together. And that's Bill Hicks' childhood best friend and manager of him and Rogan, and Doug Stanhope, neo-processian, friend of Marilyn Manson, best friend of Marilyn Manson and Johnny Depp. So again, we see the same small circle of characters exhibiting all around these kind of matters. But Jones in 2017 had a real beef with Rogan. They had a falling out for a while. And in doing so, he had on Rogan's old buddy, Jan Irvin, who accuses everybody of being CIA and in between drinking his own urine. Jan Irvin, it's last I saw him, he was doing videos about drinking his own urine. Jones had him on to badmouth Rogan, obviously talk shit. And in doing so, he interrupts Irvin at one point and he starts screaming, "I know which CIA outfit you work for, Rogan. right here in Austin. Well, I would argue that's probably true because he works for the same fucking CIA outfit. You know what I mean? Like, so we see these matters where, the truth comes out when these folks get butthurt about things. Like you're saying there, West H, about the Bohemian Grove stuff or this Rogan fallout business. But we also see it in Aquino. That podcast interview we've unpacked here in the past, where Aquino got real butthurt when the podcast interview was just simply asking a question, a legitimate question about his separation with LaVey in 75. Again, 75, right? These, it's very telling when the Process Church and the Temple of Set both form at the same time, but they go in opposite directions, but they're part of the same machine there in 75. And again, that's when we see John Todd, Mike Warnke in the first instances of the Satanic Panic in July 15th of 1975 in the Denver, Colorado Press. So nonetheless, though, we see these matters, and when we start mapping them out like that, it seems very apparent. But we see in that podcast, he got really butthurt and told the host he was very upset with LaVey for all the work they had done the previous 10 years together. Well, that's weird, Mike. He's made numerous statements about his first interaction with LaVey, as we've seen from his book. His official entrance into the Church of Satan is allegedly March of 69. He allegedly meets LaVey, I think it was July 67, so that's weird. And then we also see, and that, again, that statement, 10 years and 75, well, that would be back to April 30th, 1966, when they started the Church of Satan. Again, it's important to note, though, that in the start of the Church of Satan, LaVey's quote-unquote autobiography written by his second wife, Blanche Barton, claims they were doing all this ritualistic stuff beforehand. They just hadn't tagged it Satanism stuff. So we see that machination or epicenter of activity with this psychological operations to weaponize Christianity and folklore against the American public with Michael Aquino in 66 with LaVey. Because before that, there's ritual sacrifices and abuse of children beforehand. They're just not tagging it Satanism. And we know that even the same group of folks are involved in ritualistic activities, as admitted by Blanche Barton, LaVey's second wife. Not to be confused with LaVey's first wife, the co-founder of the Church of Satan, who in fact seems to have hooked up with Laser Tag Ted in Las Vegas in the 2000s.
There's thousands of Americans out there. By the way, I've been shot with a laser beam twice.
They got Ted twice, folks. Watch your six. Pay attention to your surroundings. Stay vigilant. So anyhow, folks of the interwebs, thanks for joining me here tonight to get a little GCD. Catch y'all over here in a few minutes there on patreon.com/Operation GCD. The link is also in the show notes for that business. And again, tomorrow, Badgerlands Legends Jeff, Operation GCD Fridays. Then Operation GCD Sundays. For those folks who do the Operation GCD Patreon combo, I appreciate your support. Please join in the conversation over there, folks. Come on down. We got Operation GCD Sundays, the anatomy of a mound cover-up. Specifically a Hanukkah mound shaped like a giant menorah that's buried at the bottom of a lake in Claremont County, Ohio. And going over the details of the cover-up and how we even know about the mound in the first place, the Society of the Cincinnati. And then again, on Wednesdays, next Wednesdays, an occult and or esoteric review of the 1993 cinematic masterpiece, Striking Distance, revolving around a serial killer dumping women's bodies there in the Pittsburgh rivers. So on that note, folks of the interwebs, thanks for joining me here again tonight. Get a little GCD, and I will catch y'all over there on the Patreon side here shortly.
Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret societies, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend in the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Hey, the world's a puzzle, brunch rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Out in the holler where the secrets creep, garbage can dudes digging mighty deep. Secret society, shadows in the pines. Operation GCD of American rebels design. Double J searching deep in his brain hole, past layers of melted hops and bone resin. From cults to cover-ups, we're talking about all of that. So watch your sixth friend and the truth we trust. The world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Operation GCD with an Appalachian grin. Adventures and shenanigans, we're diving right in. Join us on the journey and enjoy the show. Thanks for joining us to get a little GCD. Hey, the world's a puzzle, brunch rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo coats haunt the moon's pale beam. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Hell, the world's a puzzle, grunge rock ain't what it seems. Ancient alien cargo cults haunt the moon's pale beams. Cincinnati schemers, history's a haze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze. Double J's on the mic, lighting things ablaze.
Boom!